The divorce papers listed irreconcilable differences as the reason for our separation, but that wasn't the truth. The truth was that my wife, Mary, was a stranger to me, but her parents had become my family. For 5 years, I had been Mary's loyal shadow, a silent ally in her endless war against her mother, Sarah. Mary painted Sarah as a villain, a cold, critical woman who found fault in everything. I believed her. I defended her. I held her when she cried after a phone call with her mom, whispering, "I know, she's difficult." But after 5 years of marriage, a horrifying realization dawned on me. Mary didn't hate her mother's behavior, she had perfected it. The constant belittling, the casual cruelty, the way she could make me feel worthless with a single sigh, she was a mirror image of the monster she described. Our anniversary was the final crack in the facade. I had saved for months to buy her a vintage watch she'd pointed out, a delicate, timeless piece. When she opened the box, she didn't even try it on. "It's nice," she said, her voice flat, "but a bit old-fashioned, don't you think?" She placed it on the nightstand and never looked at it again. That evening, her parents, Sarah and George, called to wish us a happy anniversary. Mary put them on speakerphone, rolling her eyes at me as they spoke. "We're so proud of you too," George said, his voice warm. "David, you're the best thing that ever happened to our daughter." Mary scoffed silently. After the call, she turned to me. "God, they're so clueless. Dad thinks you're a saint. If only he knew how you left your wet towel on the bed this morning." She said it with a laugh, as if it were a joke, but her eyes were cold. It was in that moment, listening to the echo of her father's kind words and the sting of her casual contempt, that my love for her began to die. I decided then that if I was going to be judged, it would not be by her. I would seek approval from the only people who seemed willing to give it, her parents. My plan was simple. I would win them over so completely that when our marriage finally crumbled, they would be standing on my side of the wreckage. I met Mary in my final year of university. She was brilliant, fiery, and had a laugh that could fill a room. She spoke with a fierce passion about art, literature, and the injustices of the world. I was a quiet engineering student, more comfortable with numbers and schematics than with grand debates. She was everything I wasn't, and I was completely captivated. When she told me about her family, it was always with a dramatic flair. Her father, George, was a retired mechanic, a simple, kind man she adored but found a bit boring. Her mother, Sarah, however, was the central antagonist in the story of her life. According to Mary, Sarah was a woman who thrived on control and criticism. She had an opinion on everything, from Mary's career choices to the length of her hair. "She's a classic narcissist," Mary would say, sipping her wine. "Everything has to be about her. Nothing is ever good enough." I, having grown up in a quiet, stable home with parents who were loving but emotionally reserved, was horrified on her behalf. I saw Mary as a beautiful, fragile bird who had been trying to sing in a cage her whole life. My role, as I saw it, was to protect her. When we got married 2 years later, I made a silent vow to always be her shield, to stand between her and the woman who had caused her so much pain. For the first few years, our life together was a whirlwind. We bought a small house, Mary started her career as a gallery curator, and I got a steady job at an engineering firm. The issue of her mother was a constant, low-level hum in the background of our marriage. Before every visit to her parents, Mary would be tense for days. "Just be ready," she'd warn me. "Mom will probably hate the new curtains, criticize my cooking, and ask why I haven't been promoted yet." And when we were there, I would watch, ready to jump to Mary's defense. Sarah would comment, "That dress is a bit bold for a family dinner, isn't it, Mary?" And I would immediately say, "I think she looks beautiful, Sarah. It's her favorite color." George would just smile quietly, trying to keep the peace. I saw myself as the hero in our little drama, the supportive husband. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the dynamic began to shift. The very criticisms Mary attributed to her mother started appearing in our own home, directed at me. It started with small things. I'd cook dinner, and she'd push the food around her plate. "It's a little bland, isn't it? Mom always says you need more seasoning." I'd buy her flowers, and she'd say, "Lilies? David, you know I prefer roses. Mom has lilies in her garden, they're so common." I brushed it off as her just being particular, a trait she probably picked up from her mother. Then it escalated. My job, which had once been a source of pride, became a target. "Another late night at the office?" she'd ask, not with concern, but with an edge of disdain. "My mom always said that men who can't manage their time have to work late." She began to critique my friends, my hobbies, even the way I dressed. "You're wearing that shirt again? It makes you look washed out." Each comment was a small paper cut, insignificant on its own, but over time, they left me bleeding emotionally. The irony was staggering. She was using her mother as both a justification and a weapon. If she was being critical, it was because she'd learned it from Sarah. If I failed to meet her standards, it was because I wasn't living up to the expectations Sarah had supposedly set. I tried to talk to her about it. "Mary, when you say things like that, it hurts," I told her one evening. She threw her hands up in exasperation. "Oh, I'm sorry, am I being too much like my mother? Is that what you're saying? You have no idea what I went through. You can't just turn my trauma against me." The conversation was over before it began. She had built an impenetrable fortress around herself, using her past as the bricks and mortar. Any criticism of her was an attack on a victim, and I was cast as the insensitive brute who just didn't get it. The man she fell in love with, the quiet, steady engineer, was now the subject of her constant disappointment. I wasn't ambitious enough, not sophisticated enough, not exciting enough. The more I tried to please her, the more I failed. I started to feel like I was walking on eggshells in my own home, the same way she claimed to feel at her parents' house. I would double-check everything, trying to anticipate her criticisms. I bought the right coffee, I cooked the food exactly how she liked it, I wore the clothes she approved of. But it was never enough. The goalposts were always moving. Meanwhile, my relationship with her parents remained cordial but distant, filtered through the lens of Mary's narrative. I saw George as a sweet but passive man and Sarah as the difficult matriarch I had to handle with care. I was polite, I made small talk, but I kept my guard up, always ready to defend my wife. I didn't see them as people, I saw them as characters in Mary's story. I had no idea that they were watching me, seeing the light in my eyes dim over the years. They saw the way I looked at Mary, my gaze filled with a desperate plea for approval, and the way she looked past me, her eyes scanning for my next inevitable mistake. They saw their daughter becoming the one thing she swore she would never be. And I, lost in the fog of trying to be the perfect husband to a woman who saw only imperfection, was completely oblivious. I was so focused on fighting her imaginary dragons that I didn't realize she had become one herself. And she was slowly, methodically, burning our marriage to the ground. The turning point, the moment the fog finally cleared, was not a dramatic explosion but a quiet, soul-crushing evening. It was our 5th anniversary. For weeks, I had been planning. I remembered a story Mary had told me about a trip to the coast with her grandmother as a child, where she had seen a woman wearing a simple, elegant pearl necklace. She had spoken of it with a rare, wistful fondness. It was so classic, so timeless, she'd said. It took me a month to find a jeweler who could replicate the design from my clumsy sketches and hazy descriptions. The result was perfect, a single strand of lustrous pearls, delicate and understated. I imagined the look on her face, a flicker of the girl I had fallen in love with, the one who appreciated beauty in simplicity. That evening, I had a reservation at the restaurant where I had proposed, a place heavy with memories I cherished. I came home early, filled with a nervous excitement I hadn't felt in years. I found Mary in the living room, scrolling through her phone. "Happy anniversary," I said, holding out the velvet box. She looked up, her expression neutral. She took the box, opened it, and a flicker of something, disappointment? Disdain, crossed her face before being replaced by a polite, empty smile. "Oh, pearls," she said. She held them against her neck for a second, looking in the hall mirror. "They're a bit traditional, don't you think? They kind of age me." She placed the box on the hall table, next to a pile of mail. "Thank you, though. It's the thought that counts." She turned back to her phone, and just like that, the moment was over. The piece of my heart I had so carefully placed inside that box was left on the table, dismissed as easily as junk mail. Dinner was worse. The restaurant was just as I remembered, warm and intimate. But Mary was cold and distant. She answered texts throughout the meal, her lips curled into a small smile at a screen I couldn't see. I tried to reminisce about our first date there, about the plans we had made, the dreams we had shared. She just nodded, offering one-word answers. Do you remember you said you wanted to visit Japan? I asked, desperate to connect. Oh, right, she replied, her eyes still glued to her phone. I'm over that now. It's too touristy. Every attempt I made to reach her was met with a wall of indifference. We ate our expensive meal in a silence that was heavier and more suffocating than any argument. When we got home, she went straight to the bedroom and started her nightly skincare routine, as if it were any other Tuesday. I stood in the doorway, the silence from the car still ringing in my ears. Mary, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Did I do something wrong? She glanced at me in the mirror, one eyebrow raised. What are you talking about? Tonight, I said, my voice cracking. Our anniversary. It feels like you weren't even there. She sighed, a long, theatrical sound of pure exasperation. David, I'm tired. I had a stressful week at work. Do we have to do this now? I just don't have the emotional energy to coddle you. My mother does this, you know. She makes every single event about her feelings. I really don't need that from you too. And there it was. The final, devastating blow. She had taken my pain, my vulnerability, and twisted it into a weapon against me, using her mother as the sharpening stone. I wasn't a husband expressing his hurt, I was an emotional burden, a reflection of the woman she claimed to despise. I looked at her, really looked at her, and the woman I loved was gone. In her place was a stranger with a cold heart and a cruel tongue. I felt no anger, just a vast, hollow ache. I went to the guest room that night. As I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, the last 5 years replayed in my mind, but this time, the scenes were different. Every time I had defended her against her mother, every time I had soothed her frustrations, I now saw it in a new light. I hadn't been her shield, I had been her enabler. I had validated her narrative, allowing her to believe that all her flaws, all her cruelty, were just inherited traits she couldn't control. I had given her the perfect excuse to never look at herself, to never take responsibility. The next morning, I woke up with a chilling sense of purpose. The love was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. If she was going to use her family as a weapon, I would learn to play the same game. But I would be smarter, more patient. Her parents' anniversary was in a few weeks. Mary was already dreading it. Get ready for the annual guilt trip, she'd said. Mom will probably complain that I don't visit enough. I just nodded, but inside, the first pieces of a new strategy were clicking into place. I wasn't going to be her silent, supportive husband anymore. I was going to become the son her parents always wished they'd had. I would be everything to them that she was not: attentive, respectful, and loving. I would slowly, carefully, dismantle the narrative she had spent a lifetime building. She had drawn the battle lines long ago, casting her mother as the enemy. She never imagined that I would one day cross those lines and join the other side. The war for this family's affection was about to begin, and for the first time, I was no longer fighting for her. I was fighting for myself. The days following our disastrous anniversary were filled with a silence that felt both hollow and heavy. I moved through our house like a ghost, my presence barely acknowledged by Mary. The love I had felt for her, which had been the bedrock of my world for so long, had been replaced by a cold, unsettling calm. It wasn't the peace of resolution, but the eerie quiet of a battlefield after the fighting has stopped, where the air is thick with the smoke of what has been lost. My heart, which had once ached with the desperate need for her approval, now felt numb, encased in a protective layer of ice. Every interaction with her was a study in emotional detachment. I watched her as one might watch a character in a film. I saw the way she dismissed the barista at the coffee shop with a wave of her hand, the way she spoke to her junior colleagues on the phone with a tone of barely concealed impatience. These were things I had previously ignored or excused as Mary being Mary. Now, I saw them for what they were, a pattern of casual disdain for anyone she deemed beneath her, and I, her husband, was at the top of that list. The most painful part was the realization that I had allowed it. My love for her had been a blindfold, and now that it was off, the world looked harsh and ugly. My plan to win over her parents felt like a betrayal of the man I used to be. The old David was loyal to a fault, a man who believed in vows and unconditional support. This new David was a strategist, a player in a game I never wanted to be a part of. Each night, I would lie awake in the guest room, my stomach churning with a toxic cocktail of guilt and resolve. Was I becoming as manipulative as her? The thought was terrifying. I would stare at the ceiling, wrestling with my conscience. One moment, I would be consumed by a wave of righteous anger, remembering every dismissive comment, every casual cruelty she had inflicted. In those moments, my plan felt justified, a necessary act of self-preservation. But then, a memory would surface unbidden, Mary laughing in the rain on our first vacation, her face tilted towards the sky, full of pure, unadulterated joy. Or the time she sat with me for hours in the hospital waiting room after my father's surgery, holding my hand, her presence a silent, solid comfort. Was that woman completely gone? Or was she just buried so deep beneath layers of resentment and entitlement that she couldn't find her way out? In those moments of doubt, my anger would dissolve into a profound, aching sadness. The plan would feel petty and vengeful, a descent into the very darkness I was trying to escape. I wasn't just mourning the end of my marriage, I was mourning the death of the woman I thought I knew and the man I had been when I was with her. The suspense leading up to her parents' anniversary dinner was almost unbearable. It felt like I was preparing for a performance, rehearsing lines, and anticipating cues. I researched George's favorite classic cars, memorizing makes and models until the names felt familiar on my tongue. I watched online tutorials on basic gardening, trying to learn the difference between perennials and annuals, knowing that Sarah's garden was her sanctuary. This calculated effort felt deeply inauthentic, a stark contrast to the spontaneous love I had once felt for her daughter. I felt like a spy, gathering intelligence for a mission I wasn't sure I had the stomach to complete. The day of the dinner, I was a wreck. My hands trembled as I got dressed. Mary, oblivious, was in her usual pre-visit state of agitation. "Just be prepared, David. Mom's probably going to say I look tired. Don't let her get to you." Her words, once a call to arms for me to defend her, now sounded like a parody. She was coaching me for a battle, not realizing I had already switched allegiances. The hypocrisy was so thick I could barely breathe. Driving to their house, I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my chest. What if they saw right through me? What if they saw my compliments as flattery and my interest as manipulation? They were her parents, after all. Their loyalty would surely lie with her, regardless of her flaws. I imagined the scene, my fumbling attempts at connection being met with polite but cool suspicion, Mary watching from the sidelines with a smug, "I told you so" expression. The thought of failing, of being exposed as a fraud, was mortifying. It would leave me utterly alone, having alienated my wife and failed to gain any allies. But as I pulled into their driveway, another feeling began to eclipse the fear, a desperate, burning need to be seen. For 5 years, I had been invisible. My thoughts, my feelings, my efforts, all of it had been dismissed or ignored by the one person who was supposed to see me most clearly. Maybe, just maybe, Sarah and George would see me. Not as Mary's husband or the quiet engineer, but as David. A person worthy of a conversation, worthy of respect. The suspense was no longer just about the success of my plan, it was about the possibility of my own validation. I was stepping out from behind the shield I had held up for Mary for so long, and I was utterly exposed. The question that echoed in my mind as I walked towards their front door was terrifying. After all this time, was there anything of me left worth seeing? My campaign to win over Sarah and George unfolded with a success that was both thrilling and deeply unsettling. I started small. At their anniversary dinner, I didn't just compliment Sarah's cooking, I asked her about the specific blend of herbs she used, writing them down in my phone as she spoke. Her eyes, which usually held a guarded, critical light when looking at me, softened with surprise and pleasure. I spent half an hour with George in his garage, listening as he explained the intricacies of restoring his 1967 Ford Mustang. I didn't offer advice, I just listened, asking questions that showed I was paying attention. Mary watched the entire performance with a look of baffled irritation, but she said nothing, likely assuming it was a one-time fluke. It wasn't. The following weekend, I happened to be near their favorite garden center and called Sarah to ask if she needed anything. I spent an hour with her, pushing a cart through aisles of flowers as she taught me the difference between rose varieties. A week later, I sent George a link to a rare carburetor Part 1 found online, something he had mentioned he'd been searching for years. The phone call I received from him that evening was the longest conversation we had ever had. He was ecstatic, not just about the part, but that I had remembered. Mary's confusion quickly curdled into suspicion, then outright hostility. "Why are you suddenly so interested in my parents?" she demanded one night. "It's weird. You're acting weird." "They're nice people, Mary," I said calmly, my heart pounding. "I enjoy spending time with them." "No," she snapped. "You're trying to do something. You're trying to make me look bad." The accusation was so close to the truth that it sent a chill down my spine, but her self-centeredness gave me the perfect cover. She couldn't imagine a motive that didn't revolve around her. She thought I was competing for her parents' affection to spite her, not that I was genuinely finding solace in their company. The second twist, the one that changed the entire game, came about 2 months into my campaign. It was a Saturday, and I was helping George fix a leaky faucet in their guest bathroom. We had been working for an hour, a comfortable silence between us, punctuated by the clanking of tools. "You know," George said suddenly, wiping his hands on a rag, "Mary used to be just like you." I froze, my hand hovering over the wrench. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral. He sighed, leaning against the wall. "Before she met you. In her first year of college. She was quieter. Kinder. She'd call Sarah every day, just to talk. She'd remember my birthday without a reminder. She was happy." He looked at me, his eyes filled with a deep, paternal sadness. "Then she got into that art history program. She met new people, professors who told her she was brilliant and special. And she started to change. She started talking about how our simple life was holding her back, how her mother's middle-class values were stifling her potential. It was like she was ashamed of us." He paused, and the silence was heavy with unspoken pain. "When she brought you home," he continued, "we were so happy. You were steady. Grounded. You were like the boy she used to be. We thought you would be good for her. We thought you would bring our old Mary back." He looked down at his hands. "But we were wrong. She didn't become more like you. You started to disappear. Every time we saw you, you were a little quieter, a little sadder. You started looking at her the way we look at her now, with a little bit of fear, always waiting for the criticism." The air left my lungs. The narrative that Mary had so carefully constructed, the story of her as the lifelong victim of a critical mother, crumbled into dust. The change in her hadn't been a slow, inherited trait. It had been a conscious choice, a persona she had adopted. Her mother wasn't the cause of her cruelty, she was the excuse. Sarah's criticism wasn't the root of the problem, it was a reaction to the daughter who had suddenly decided her parents were no longer good enough. "I'm sorry," George said, misinterpreting my silence. "I shouldn't be saying this. It's not my place." "No," I said, my voice hoarse. "Thank you, George. Thank you for telling me." That conversation was a seismic shift. My mission was no longer about revenge or self-preservation. It was about truth. The guilt that had been gnawing at me vanished, replaced by a white-hot clarity. I wasn't manipulating them. I was simply allowing them to see the man I had always been, the man Mary had tried so hard to extinguish. The conflict was no longer just between me and Mary. It was a battle for the soul of this family, a fight to reclaim the history she had rewritten to suit her own selfish narrative. The next time I saw Sarah, I looked at her with new eyes. I saw not a critical tyrant, but a mother whose daughter had broken her heart. I was helping her prune her rose bushes, and she was explaining how each one needed a different kind of care. "This one," she said, touching a delicate pink rose, "is a peace rose. It's very resilient, but it needs a lot of sun. If you keep it in the shade, it will never bloom." The metaphor was so poignant, so painfully accurate, that I had to look away. I started talking to her, really talking. I asked her about her life before she was a mother, about her dreams and her disappointments. I learned that she had wanted to be a landscape architect but had given it up to raise Mary. Her garden wasn't just a hobby, it was the unfulfilled dream she tended to every day. Mary had never told me that. In Mary's stories, her mother was a one-dimensional villain. The real Sarah was a woman of depth, intelligence, and a quiet, profound sadness. As my bond with her parents deepened, it became something real and precious, entirely separate from my failing marriage. We would have dinner, just the three of us, when Mary claimed she had to work late. We would laugh and talk for hours. In their company, I felt like myself again. I was funny, I was interesting, I was valued. I was the David that Mary had fallen in love with and then systematically dismantled. The suspense was gone, replaced by a growing sense of belonging. I had found a family, just not the one I had expected. The only question left was what would happen when Mary finally realized that the allies she had taken for granted had firmly and irrevocably chosen to stand with me. The foundation of her world was about to crack, and this time, I wouldn't be there to catch her when she fell. The climax arrived not with a whisper, but with a roar, on the day of George's 70th birthday. I had been planning a surprise party for him for months, a grand celebration to honor a man who asked for so little and deserved so much. It became my secret project, a mission I shared only with Sarah. Together, we compiled guest lists, chose a caterer, and dug through old photo albums. Sarah's eyes would light up as we worked, a youthful excitement replacing the weary sadness I had grown accustomed to seeing. In those moments, we were not a mother-in-law and son-in-law, we were co-conspirators in an act of love. Mary, predictably, wanted nothing to do with it. When I first proposed the idea, she had scoffed. A party? Dad hates being the center of attention. It's a terrible idea, David. It's just you trying to be the perfect son-in-law again. It's so transparent. She refused to help, refused to contribute, and made it clear that she considered the entire endeavor a foolish waste of time and money. Her detachment was a gift, allowing me and Sarah to plan without her constant negativity. The day of the party was perfect. We had set up a large tent in their beautiful backyard, the one I had helped George build the deck for. Dozens of friends and family members, people who had known George his entire life, gathered, their faces filled with genuine affection. George was completely overwhelmed, his eyes shining with unshed tears as he hugged me. "I don't know what to say, son," he murmured into my shoulder. "No one's ever done anything like this for me." Sarah stood beside him, beaming, her hand resting proudly on my arm. For a moment, standing there between them, I felt a sense of peace, of rightness, that I hadn't felt in years. The only person missing was Mary. She had promised to be there early to help with last-minute details, but as the guests arrived and the party got underway, there was no sign of her. I called her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. A familiar, bitter disappointment settled in my stomach, but I pushed it down, refusing to let her absence ruin this day for her father. An hour into the party, I stood up to give a speech. I spoke of George's quiet strength, his unwavering kindness, and the profound impact he'd had on my life. "George taught me that the measure of a man isn't in grand gestures," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "but in the small, consistent acts of love and service he shows to the people around him. He is the best man I have ever known." It was at that exact moment that Mary chose to make her entrance. She walked into the backyard, not with a look of apology, but with an air of frantic drama. She was on her phone, speaking in a loud, agitated voice. "I know, it's a nightmare. The tire just completely blew out on the freeway. I've been waiting for a tow truck for over an hour. It's been the worst day." Every head turned towards her. The heartfelt tribute to her father was instantly derailed by her performance. She hung up the phone with a dramatic sigh and rushed over to George. "Daddy, I am so sorry I'm late. You won't believe what happened." I watched the scene unfold, a cold fury building inside me. I knew she was lying. Her hair was perfect, her makeup flawless. There wasn't a speck of dirt on her clothes. This wasn't a woman who had been stranded on the side of a freeway, this was a woman who had just come from a leisurely brunch. She was manufacturing a crisis to absolve herself of her lateness and, more importantly, to reclaim the spotlight. But before I could say anything, before George could even respond, Sarah stepped forward. She moved with a calm, deliberate grace that was terrifying to behold. She stopped directly in front of Mary, her face an unreadable mask. "Where have you been, Mary?" she asked, her voice deceptively soft. "Mom, I just told you," Mary said, her voice laced with exasperation, as if speaking to a child. "My tire blew out. It was awful." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "That's funny," she said, her voice growing colder, clearer, carrying across the silent yard. "Because your cousin Jenny just texted me a picture from her birthday lunch. And you were there, sitting right next to her, laughing and drinking mimosas. The picture was timestamped 15 minutes ago." The world seemed to stop. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Mary's face, which had been a mask of theatrical distress, crumbled. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking pale and skeletal. She was caught. Utterly and completely caught in a lie so blatant, so disrespectful, that there was no way to spin it. I was going to come straight here after," Mary stammered, her eyes darting around, looking for an ally, for someone to rescue her. But there was no one. All she saw were the shocked and disappointed faces of her family and friends. Her gaze finally landed on me, a desperate, pleading look in her eyes. It was the look she always gave me, the one that said, "Fix this. Defend me." But I just stood there, my expression as cold and hard as stone. I did nothing. I said nothing. I offered her no escape. Then George, who had been silent until now, spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but it resonated with the weight of 70 years of quiet dignity. "We know, Mary," he said, his voice heavy with a sorrow that was far more damning than any anger. "We know you lie. We've always known." He looked from her to me, and then back to her. "This man," he said, gesturing towards me, "spent 2 months planning this beautiful day for me. He has shown me more respect and love in the past year than you have in the last decade. He remembered my birthday. You went to lunch." Each word was a hammer blow, dismantling the last vestiges of her self-delusion. This wasn't a simple scolding. This was a fundamental shift in the family's tectonic plates. Sarah delivered the final, devastating blow. "I have spent my life being the villain in the story you tell yourself, Mary," she said, her voice trembling with a lifetime of suppressed pain. "I was the critical mother, the one who was never satisfied. But the truth is, you were the one who was never satisfied. Not with us, not with your life, and not with this good, kind man who has loved you more than you ever deserved." She took a step back, standing beside me, and slipped her hand into the crook of my arm. It was a small gesture, but it was a declaration. An alignment. Mary stood alone in the center of the yard, exposed and utterly defeated. The silence was absolute. There were no more excuses, no more lies, no more narratives to hide behind. There was only the stark, ugly truth, laid bare for everyone to see. She looked at me one last time, her eyes wide with a dawning horror, the horror of realizing that the game was over, and she had lost. She hadn't just lost the argument. She had lost her audience, her allies, her parents, and her husband, all in one catastrophic, self-inflicted moment. The foundation of her world had not just cracked, it had been obliterated. And I, the man she had tried to break, was left standing firmly on solid ground, right next to the family that had finally, irrevocably, chosen me. The aftermath of George's party was not filled with shouting or dramatic confrontations, but with a profound and deafening silence. Mary fled the party without another word, a solitary figure retreating from the wreckage she had created. No one went after her. The celebration continued, but a quiet solemnity had settled over the guests. It was as if everyone collectively understood that they had just witnessed the end of something. That night, I didn't go to the guest room. I packed a bag and went home with Sarah and George. There was no discussion, it was simply understood. They showed me to their actual guest room, the one Mary had always complained was drafty and filled with old furniture. It was warm, clean, and welcoming. I slept more soundly that night than I had in years. The next few days were a blur of text messages and voicemails from Mary. They began as angry and accusatory. "How could you let them talk to me like that? You just stood there? You were supposed to be on my side." Then, as my silence persisted, they morphed into desperate, pleading bargains. "I'm sorry, okay? I'll change. We can go to counseling. I'll be better, I promise. Just come home." Finally, they dissolved into tearful, self-pitying ramblings. "I don't understand why this is happening. I love you. Why are you doing this to me?" Listening to them, I felt nothing. The part of my heart that was capable of responding to her was gone, cauterized by years of neglect and the final, searing betrayal. Her words were just noise, the meaningless static of a broadcast from a world I no longer inhabited. My world was now the quiet rhythm of her parents' home. It was drinking coffee with George on the deck in the morning, discussing the news. It was helping Sarah in the garden in the afternoon, our hands covered in dirt. It was the simple, profound comfort of being in the presence of people who saw me, valued me, and expected nothing from me but to be myself. About a week after the party, I met with a lawyer and filed for divorce. I didn't ask for anything. I just wanted it to be over. I let Mary have the house, the furniture, the life we had built together. I had no attachment to any of it. It was all just a stage set from a play where I had been miscast. The ultimate revenge, the final act of closure, was not something I planned. It happened organically, a natural consequence of the new reality. 3 months after I filed for divorce, Sarah called me. Her voice was hesitant. "David," she said, "George and I are updating our will. We've been talking about it for a while." She paused. "We want to make you a beneficiary. We want to leave you a portion of our estate." I was stunned into silence. Sarah, you don't have to do that. I would never expect that. We know, she said, her voice soft but firm. That's why we're doing it. You are the son we always hoped for, David. You came into this family and you healed parts of it we thought were broken forever. This isn't about money. It's about acknowledging that you are, and always will be, our son. The final piece of the puzzle was the family's small beach cottage on the coast. It was a modest, weathered little house that had been in Sarah's family for generations. It was the place Mary had spoken of with that rare fondness, the place where she had seen the woman with the pearl necklace. It was her one truly happy memory. In all her stories, it was the one place her mother couldn't ruin. She had always assumed it would be hers one day. When the divorce was finalized, I learned that Sarah and George had made their decision. They didn't leave the cottage to Mary. They didn't sell it. They signed the deed over to me. I received the keys in the mail with a simple, handwritten note from Sarah. Every family needs a place to gather. We hope you will continue to let us visit. The first time I drove down to the cottage alone, it was a crisp autumn day. The air smelled of salt and pine. It was small and rustic, filled with mismatched furniture and the faint scent of old wood. On the mantelpiece was a framed photo. It was of a young girl, no older than 7, with a wide, gap-toothed grin, holding a seashell. It was Mary. But it was a Mary the first had never known, a happy, carefree child, untouched by the bitterness and entitlement that would later consume her. It was the girl from the stories, the girl who had loved this place. I learned from George that when Mary found out about the will, and especially about the cottage, she had a complete breakdown. She had screamed, she had cried, she had accused them of the ultimate betrayal. She couldn't comprehend it. In her mind, she was the victim, the wronged daughter whose inheritance had been stolen by the conniving ex-husband. She had lost the house, she had lost her parents' financial support, but the loss of the cottage was the loss of her narrative. It was the final, irrefutable proof that she was not the hero of her own story. My revenge was not in taking things from her. It was in my happiness. It was in the quiet, fulfilling life I built without her. It was in the genuine, loving relationship I had with her parents. They became my true family. We spent holidays at the cottage. George and I would go fishing. Sarah and I would work on the small garden she planted out front. They were my son's grandparents, doting on the child I had with the woman I married 2 years later, a woman who was kind, who was my partner in the truest sense of the word. Sometimes, when I'm at the cottage, I look at that photo of the little girl on the mantel. I don't feel anger or bitterness. I feel a distant, quiet pity for the woman she became. She had everything, a husband who adored her, parents who loved her, and she threw it all away because she could never see past herself. She wanted to be the sun in her own universe, but she ended up a cold, lonely planet, having driven away every star that ever tried to warm her. My ultimate revenge was not in her destruction, but in my own peace. I had escaped her orbit. I had found my own light. And in the end, that was all that mattered.